welcome to the Zen Studies Podcast. I'm Domio Burke. Thanks to new supporting members of the podcast, Stephen from Orlando, Florida, Geert from Eindhoven in the Netherlands, Darla from Dayton, Nevada, Diane from Madison, Wisconsin, Paul from South Bend, Indiana, Rishan from Corvallis, Oregon, Amanda from Mercer Island, Washington, and Ryan from Long Beach, New York. Thanks, everyone, for your encouragement. So this is the second half of a 2-episode discussion. Are the Buddha's teachings on renunciation relevant for householders? So I'm going to briefly review the limitations of sensual and worldly pleasures, and then explore how engagement with the world, contrary to simply being a compromise, can be its own path of practice. Finally, I'll talk about how the Buddha's teachings on renunciation are not only relevant, but deeply meaningful and useful for householders. In the last episode, I described the path of practice recommended by the Buddha. That is, a path of strict renunciation of almost all the sensual and worldly pleasures that bring happiness and meaning to the lives of most of us. Now, sensual pleasures include pleasures of the heart and mind. So they include things like intimate relationships, the comfort and privacy of your own home, the joy of travel. It's apparent from the original Buddhist texts that lay people, also called householders, as they practiced Buddhism while living in a household, were capable of everything but the very highest level of spiritual attainment. While the renunciate path, the path of home leaving or homelessness, was considered preferable, it wasn't exactly necessary. However, according to at least one story, which I shared in the last episode, once someone attained the highest level of liberation, that of an arhat, they lost all taste for worldly pleasures and concerns and would therefore leave home, even if they were a householder up until that moment. So at the end of the last episode, I explored some of the troubling questions this can present to household practitioners, including me. Is the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice a state in which we stop caring about anyone or anything? We don't want anything anymore? Fortunately, the answer to this question is no. And I suggested that instead, spiritual liberation in the Buddhist sense opens us up to an unconditional happiness and a sense of meaning that transcends anything else we've ever known. And this means we're no longer dependent on conditional things for happiness and peace of mind. So we can freely make the choice about our degree of engagement with the world. So I'm going to explore the positive aspects of liberation more in this episode, but first I just want to briefly review the drawbacks or limitations of sensual pleasures. And again, our mind is considered a sense in Buddhism, so these pleasures are not limited to those of physical experiences. Now, sense pleasures are not considered inherently bad or sinful in Buddhism. Instead, the recommendation that you find something else to rely on for happiness and peace of mind is based on very pragmatic reasons. Now, describing the drawbacks of sensual pleasures can end up sounding a bit preachy or negative. But bear with me, because this will set up a more nuanced discussion of how to practice as a householder. So the first drawback of sensual or worldly pleasures is that we naturally want them to last, even though they don't. We want the good things in our life to last, but we know they're not going to, and our awareness of this can make us uneasy. Not only that, even if conditions remain more or less the same, our pleasurable experience of them does not. This is the nature of impermanence. The classic example of this is anticipating and enjoying a delicious meal. It's our appetite that helps make the meal enjoyable. If we kept eating past the point we were hungry, the meal would quickly become painful instead of enjoyable. By their very nature, sense pleasures are temporary and ephemeral. If children stopped growing, if sunsets got stuck, if the seasons never changed, if there were no more challenges to arise to, our enjoyment of these things would also fade, or at least change. The second drawback of worldly pleasures is that the ephemeral nature of the satisfaction they provide means we are constantly seeking more pleasure. Because of the transient nature of all of these things, we have to keep seeking new ones to keep us happy and satisfied. In addition, these pleasures are conditional. They require certain circumstances or opportunities or proximity to certain things or people. It's perfectly natural to enjoy good health, family relationships, leisure time, hikes in nature, or a successful career. But these things inevitably change. Or we are deprived of the source of our happiness at some point. We may become ill, or relationships may become difficult, or we lose people. We may be very busy and unable to spend enough time doing those things we enjoy. If we're dependent on conditional pleasures, we will need to grasp tightly the ones we still have or go looking for new ones to sustain us. The third drawback is the burden and stress of first obtaining these sensual or worldly pleasures and then maintaining them. As I've mentioned before on the podcast, in the Pali Canon, the Maha Dukkha Kanda Sutta, the Great Massive Stress Sutta, describes the many drawbacks of relying on sensuality for happiness. Now, the sutta admits there's an allure to these things. They can be, quote, agreeable, pleasing, charming, endearing, fostering desire, enticing, end quote. However, the sutta goes on to describe the drawbacks of these things, including the need to labor for them and endure whatever unpleasantness is involved in your job. And if you are unable to obtain them, you may feel distraught. And once you have obtained them, you need to protect them. And this can be a cause of conflict and animosity in your relationships. And the fourth drawback of worldly pleasures is the misery we experience, of course, when we're separated from them. And then the fifth is that they can distract us from practice. We spend a lot of time planning to obtain them, working to obtain them, and then maintaining them. And we also spend time, of course, immersed in them. Sometimes the more full and wonderful our life is, the harder it is to make practice a priority. Now, most Buddhists I know understand the drawbacks to sensual or worldly pleasures, but feel strongly that their engagement with the world is more than worth it. Their sentiments, which I wholeheartedly agree with, are summed up well in the saying, "It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." It may make us sad, or sometimes even anxious or depressed, to think our children will grow up and move away, that our loved ones will eventually die, or the house we've lovingly maintained will one day crumble into ruin. But we see this as the price of love, and we don't hesitate to pay it. For those of us who practice as householders, more or less, It's not simply a matter of being willing to compromise our practice in order to indulge in worldly pleasures and relationships. There may be a little of that, of course, as we contemplate the life of a renunciate and think of all the things we'd be loath to give up. But at a deeper level, we recognize how at least some of our worldly engagements are opportunities for practice, not obstructions to practice or distractions from it. Through raising a child, we might be mightily challenged to let go of self-concern, to give up our efforts to control everything, to learn the profound truth of how our true self does not end at our skin, but manifests in part in beings and things beyond us. Learning a skill or an art may help us identify our karmic obstacles and open us up to new ways of being in the world. Our work may demand we learn patience, forgiveness, and acceptance. Our intimate relationships may bring out our deepest fears and also our greatest strengths. Our material possessions give us an opportunity to practice gratitude and generosity. There's a saying in Buddhism, and it might be shared by other traditions, which says, "It's easy to be enlightened on a mountaintop." Similarly, it may be relatively easy to feel like you've achieved some level of spiritual attainment when you're in the protected environment of a monastery or in the deep silence of retreat. It's when you come back into the world and have to deal with other people and situations that whatever insight or equanimity you have attained gets tested. I mean, of course, monasteries aren't always the easiest places to be either. There are people there too. But whether it's in a monastery or out in the world, we learn an immense amount from our personal interactions with people, the way we fill roles, the way we perform tasks and express ourselves, and the way our heart is touched by the things we encounter. Even when it comes to those pleasures we simply enjoy, with no particular edifying practice lesson attached to them, we have a chance to face impermanence head on. It's a difficult but transformative practice to learn to wholeheartedly appreciate someone or something, even though we know we are going to lose them. Or to wholeheartedly make an effort, even when we know complete satisfaction is elusive. Buddhist teacher Jack Kornfield tells a story about his teacher Ajahn Chah, who was holding up a beautiful teacup and said, quote, "To me, this cup is already broken. Because I know its fate, I can enjoy it fully here and now. And when it's gone, it's gone." End quote. So Kornfield continues, quote, "When we understand the truth of uncertainty, we become free. The broken cup helps us see beyond our illusion of control. When we commit ourselves to raising a child, building a business, creating a work of art, or righting an injustice, some measure of failure as well as success will be ours. This is a fierce teaching. We may lose our best piece of pottery in the firing. The charter school we work so hard to create may fold. Our startup business may go under. Our children may develop problems beyond our control. If we focus only on the results, we will be devastated. But if we know the cup is broken, we can give our best to the process, create what we can, and trust the larger process of life itself. We can plan, we can care for, tend, and respond, but we cannot control. Instead, we take a breath and open to what is unfolding where we are. This is a profound shift from holding on to letting go. As Suzuki Roshi says, when we understand the truth of impermanence and find our composure in it, there we find ourselves in nirvana. The impermanence of the glass is inherent in its existence, just as our own deaths are inherent in ours. End quote. It's possible to hide out in a monastery or within the confines of monastic discipline, avoiding the pain of impermanence by minimizing your engagement with anything you might come to care about, love, depend on. You may avoid engagement with the world out of fear or self-doubt. Now, this isn't to say that the practice of renunciation is bad or diluted. I recommend it. Just that the measure of real practice is something based on what is happening in your body, mind, and heart. Not on whether you happen to live in a household or within the restraints of monastic discipline. Now, as householder practitioners, we usually love the story of Ajahn Chah's teacup. We take it as affirmation that our life, full as it usually is of relationships, responsibilities, possessions, activities, entertainments, hobbies, travel, etc., is nothing more than an incredibly rich and useful practice venue. As long as we don't get attached to things, as long as we periodically contemplate impermanence, we can diligently practice no matter how much we have, how much we do. When it comes to the question of householder versus renunciate practice, one extreme, which I hope we've rejected, is the belief that the renunciate path is the best or only path of practice, or that the householder practice is a compromise. The other extreme is the belief that renunciation is completely irrelevant to Buddhism, unless you're one of those odd people who like the idea of living without possessions or pleasures. On the Access to Insight website, a wonderful repository of Pali Canon texts and related articles that I refer to frequently, it says this: the Vinaya is the textual framework upon which the monastic community is built. It includes not only the rules governing the life of every Theravada, bhikkhu, monk, or bhikkhuni, nun, but also a host of procedures and conventions of etiquette that support harmonious relations, both among the monastics themselves and between the monastics and their lay supporters upon whom they depend for all their material needs. It helps to keep in mind that the name the Buddha gave to the spiritual path he taught was Dhamma-Vinaya. The doctrine Dhamma and discipline Vinaya, suggesting an integrated body of wisdom and ethical training. The Vinaya is thus an indispensable facet and foundation of all the Buddha's teachings, inseparable from the Dharma, and worthy of study by all followers, lay and ordained alike. Lay practitioners will find in the Vinaya Pitaka many valuable lessons concerning human nature, guidance on how to establish and maintain a harmonious community organization, and many profound teachings of the Dhamma itself. But its greatest value, perhaps, lies in its power to inspire the layperson to consider the extraordinary possibilities presented by a life of true renunciation, a life lived fully in tune with the Dhamma. End quote. What can we, as householders, learn from the Vinaya, or from the example of strict renunciation? It's not a practice we're ever going to literally do ourselves. So what is the point of contemplating it? For me, spiritual renunciates, Buddhist or otherwise, have always been fascinating. When life is stripped down to its bare essentials for a prolonged period of time, how do you amuse yourself? How do you avoid getting profoundly bored or depressed? Don't you end up feeling trapped? No Netflix, no novels, no wine, no music, no cuddly dogs, no vacations to plan and anticipate, no diversions, no personal projects, no new possessions to acquire, no intimate relationship. Even those of us who lead relatively simple lives, and it's all relative, fill our days with choices aimed at our own comfort and pleasure, from our hot mug of coffee or tea in the morning, to our afternoon run, to our half hour spent perusing the news or social media. A renunciate has none of that. And yet, there are many content renunciates. The path has its own challenges, of course, but there are plenty of people in the world who stick it out for many years, if not for their entire lives. And they often appear to be among the most contented people around. From Buddhist monks like the Dalai Lama, to silent Christian monks and nuns in cloisters, to Indian sadhus meditating in remote caves, they often seem unusually present and calm and joyful. Now, such a life is definitely not for everyone, but as access to insights suggests, such examples can inspire the layperson to consider the extraordinary possibilities presented by a life of true renunciation. It's important to realize that Buddhist renunciation is not a penance, that is, a punishment undergone in token of penitence for sin. It's not a prolonged struggle against the weakness of the flesh, or even an effort to avoid being defiled by the world. Instead, it is, potentially, a practice that leads to profound, simple, and unconditional joy and peace. The Pali Canon's Kalagoda Sutta, in this translation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, tells a story that illustrates the joy of the renunciate path. So, quote, a large number of monks heard Venerable Bhadia, Kalagoda's son, on going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, repeatedly exclaim, "What bliss! What bliss!" And on hearing him, the thought occurred to them, there's no doubt that Venerable Bhadia doesn't enjoy leading the holy life. For when he was a householder, he knew the bliss of kingship. So that now, on recollecting that, when going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, he is repeatedly exclaiming, "What bliss! What bliss!" End quote. The monks then go to the Buddha about this. And the Buddha asks Venerable Bhadia why he goes around saying, "What bliss, what bliss?" And Bhadia replies, quote, "Before, when I was a householder maintaining the bliss of kingship, I had guards posted within and without the royal apartments, within and without the city, within and without the countryside. But even though I was thus guarded, thus protected, I dwelt in fear, agitated, distrustful, and afraid. But now, on going alone to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, I dwell without fear, unagitated, confident, and unafraid, unconcerned, unruffled, my wants satisfied, with my mind like a wild deer. This is the compelling reason I have in mind that, when going to the wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty dwelling, I repeatedly exclaim, What bliss, what bliss. End quote. I think every one of us can relate in some way to Badia's joy in simplicity. No matter how wealthy we are, or how many human relationships we maintain, or how full our lives are of enjoyable activities and meaningful engagements, our engagements with the world may provide rich opportunities for practice, but they also come inevitably at a cost. The more possessions we have, the harder we have to work to pay for them, maintain them, and protect them. The more commitments we make, the busier we are. The more activities we're engaged in, the more likely we are to feel stressed or overwhelmed, at least at times. The more exciting and enjoyable things we do, the more our minds will be full of anticipation instead of being able to calmly enjoy the present moment. The more relationships we maintain, the more complicated and demanding our lives become. Each of us decides for ourselves how much is too much. And frankly, it's impossible to achieve perfect, permanent balance. For most of us, engagement with the people and activities and objects that we care about is worth the occasional times when things get a little overwhelming. However, we might take the message of Buddhist renunciation to heart by honestly reflecting on our choices and whether there's anything we can do without to create more space in our lives for practice. Whether that's formal practice, like sitting or time with Sangha, or the informal practice of just trying to be mindful, alert, and appreciative each moment. Sometimes I find myself stressed, listing to myself all the things I have to do. And then, on some reflection, I recognize how many of these things on my list I have chosen to do because they're pleasurable or relaxing or healthy or sustaining or educational. I could easily opt out of a few of these things, but I'm generally loath to let any of them go. Most people I know will readily admit they have too much stuff, too many activities in their schedules, that sometimes we emphasize materialistic pleasures, namely things that cost money, to the extent that it compromises our ability to enjoy the simple things in life. It's not unusual to hear someone admit that they find themselves missing some of the stillness and simplicity of the COVID-19 lockdown. I mean, nobody ever says they want to be back in that situation. But some of us found the lack of options strangely liberating. You couldn't just go shopping as a pastime or go on trips. There were no conferences or festivals to go to, or concerts. You couldn't go out to dinner. Most projects were halted. And as a consequence, we lived much simpler lives. Now, naturally, I missed all kinds of things during lockdown, but I never once found myself rushing to get from one activity to another. I never found myself trying to cram one more thing into my schedule. I couldn't just run to the store for anything that popped into my head. And, I mean, I could order online, but at least I wasn't driving around the town in traffic. And yeah, then there was hardly any traffic. Everything slowed down. Perhaps it's helpful to translate the Buddhist teachings on renunciation for a householder as voluntary simplicity. The teachings and the examples of the monastic renunciates who embody them remind us that happiness and peace of mind are not dependent on the stuff we have and do. We certainly enjoy and learn from our engagement with the world, but it's easy to overdo it and neglect our practice. A given relationship possession or activity may bring us great joy. But if we're constantly focused on the next interaction, acquisition, or exciting or pleasurable experience, we'll miss the only thing that's real, this very moment. It's possible to embrace voluntary simplicity in a positive way without making a negative judgment about whatever it is we may have decided to do without. Instead, we can just think of Badia sitting under a tree, exclaiming, "What bliss! What bliss!" The unconditional contentment we can experience through practice is something we can access at any time. It can remain with us even when, eventually and inevitably, we lose all the worldly things we currently enjoy. And there's no prescription for how voluntary simplicity should look for a householder. You very well may choose to buy less or work less, plan fewer activities, or carefully prioritize your commitments and let go of some of them in order to create more space in your life. But it's also important to remember that our meditation practice is an act of renunciation. For a set period of time, we put absolutely everything down. Silent retreats are longer periods of renunciation, lasting for a day to a week. And making time for them can be very transformative. And then, of course, we can also practice renunciation moment by moment. When we realize we're preoccupied with anticipation and kind of oblivious to what's going on around us, then we can take a deep breath and turn toward the essential matter of our life. So that's it for today. I will be back next month with a new episode. I hope you'll tune in. Thanks for listening.